Everyone knows the story of the Titanic, the opulent British ocean liner that struck an iceberg and sank. But it's likely you have never heard of the Cap Arcona, a German version of the Titanic. Before World War II, the vessel was a cruise ship for the well-to-do. By the end of the war, the Nazis had transformed it into a floating concentration camp. Packed with prisoners, the Cap Arcona was anchored in Lübeck Bay in the Baltic Sea when an aerial attack just hours before liberation killed nearly everyone on board. As we first reported in October, the ship's improbable journey from luxury liner to death trap is one of the most horrific and little-known war stories we have encountered. On sunlit days, Germany's Baltic coast looks idyllic, but this beauty masks an unthinkable horror, one that's etched in the local memory and on this beachside marker bearing the name Cap Arcona and the German words for fear, panic, and grief.
It's so calm, so peaceful, and yet out there is a graveyard. You can come to a place like this and just feel the weight of the history.
British historian Bill Niven has spent much of his career studying the Holocaust. We met him at Lübeck Bay, where the memory of the Cap Arcona and a smaller cargo ship bombed on May 3, 1945, still haunts this shore. What is this place?
This is a memorial, an honorary memorial to the victims of the two ships that went down with a loss of some 7,000 lives. It recalls all the nationalities that were victims of the sinking of the ships.
There were Americans on the ships.
Yes. There were Greeks, there were Italians, and the Jewish people, of course, represented here by the Star of David.
Most of the victims were on the Cap Arcona. Every year on the anniversary of the attack, a somber ceremony is held at this site to remember those who perished and those who suffered.
My father was one of the survivors of the sinking of the Cap Arcona.
Bruno Neurath Wilson came to honor his father Willie, a political prisoner held on the Cap Arcona. Only about 400 prisoners survived the attack, including Bruno's father. What's it like for you to be in this place?
When we go to the place where the Cap Arcona sank, I try to imagine what happened. I really cannot imagine what happened on the ship.
No one could have imagined this end for the Cap Arcona. Launched with great fanfare in 1927, the ship became known as the Queen of the Atlantic, transporting well-heeled passengers from Europe to South America in 2 weeks. What was it like in its heyday?
Well, it was one of the most beautiful ships the Germans had. It had its own tennis court. It had a heating swimming pool. It had the most wonderful restaurant where you could look out onto the sea, the most wonderful first-class cabins.
It was a luxury
cruise liner, absolutely was.
The Cap Arcona traversed the Atlantic dozens of times, but in 1933, Germany underwent a sea change. Adolf Hitler came to power. In 1939, as German troops invaded Poland, the Nazis commandeered the Cap Arcona to serve as a floating barracks in the Baltic. Ironically, on one of its last trips before the war, the ocean liner carried some German Jewish passengers who had bought tickets to safety in South America. But most Jews had no way to escape.
We were rounded up and sent to the concentration camp. Just the three of us, my mother, I, and my younger brother.
95-year-old Manfred Goldberg was just 11 when the Nazis forcibly removed him and other Jews from his hometown of Kassel in central Germany.
The cruel experiences during my young years, between 11 and 15, they're firmly lodged clearly in my mind to this day.
He would survive confinement in the Riga, Latvia ghetto and 4 different concentration camps.
We lost our names. Each one of us was given a number instead. In the well-known camp of Auschwitz, people had the number tattooed on their arm, but we had to remember our numbers. My number, incidentally, was 5, 6, 4, 7, 8. If you forgot it in the camps, you were usually punished for it. So I buried it in my mind so as never to forget it. And I won't, as long as I live.
In Nazi-held Latvia, Goldberg, his mother Rosa, and other prisoners were forced to repair bombed-out railroad tracks during the day. When they returned to camp one night, they learned the SS had taken Manfred's little brother Herman and 3 other children. They were never seen again.
They just disappeared off the face of the earth. The next morning, both my mother and I had to line up and go to work as though nothing untoward had happened.
What did that do to you and your mother?
I had grown close to my brother because my mother packed some fairy tale books, stories for small children. And we would lie on the floor side by side and I would read to him because he couldn't read himself. As a result, we were so very close to each other. So when he disappeared, I was nearly as heartbroken as my mother at the loss of her little baby, so to speak. He was 7 when he went into the camps and 9 the day he disappeared.
Goldberg and his mother ended up in the Stutthof camp in Nazi-occupied Poland. Another young boy, George Schwab, was imprisoned there too.
The crematoria, burning of bodies all the time, gassing, terrible.
Schwab is 93, but he was only 9 when German soldiers invaded his hometown of Liepaja, Latvia. Schwab's father, a prominent physician, tried to protect other Jews in town.
He noticed SS trucks were approaching, and he waved for fellow Jews to disperse. And they arrested him, knocked out one eye, threw him down the cellar, and then killed him.
Bruno's father, Willy Neurath, was not Jewish, but he actively opposed the Nazi regime.
My parents belonged to the small minority of German people who fought against the Nazis. They didn't fight with weapons, of course.
Fight with their words.
Yes, fighting with papers, with printed papers.
Willy was arrested for distributing anti-fascist flyers.
They brought them to Buchenwald, and from Buchenwald they brought him to the concentration camp Neuengamme by Hamburg.
The Neuengamme work camp mostly held political prisoners. Inside this massive warehouse, historian Bill Niven told us, prisoners like Willy Neurath made bricks.
What does it feel like to walk in here?
It feels like a factory of death. You can sense what went on in this place.
But this was not a death camp. This was a work camp.
It's a very, very slim distinction. In the course of this work, they die. They die in droves.
Willy Neurath managed to survive, but as fate would have it, he, Schwab, the Goldbergs, and the Cap Arcona all would end up at Lübeck Bay, one of the last Nazi defensive positions. In 1945, as the Allies were closing in, the Cap Arcona, now rusted and battered, was repositioned to Lübeck Bay. At the same time, SS Chief Heinrich Himmler ordered the evacuation of concentration camps.
Why were they trying to clear these places out?
There is an order by Himmler that no prisoner is to be delivered into the hands of the enemy alive. But I think the main concern was to get rid of evidence, because prisoners are evidence. They can talk, they can tell, they can speak to those atrocities that were committed by the Nazis. So getting rid of the evidence meant getting rid of human beings.
Thousands of prisoners were sent to the Nazi holdout at Lübeck Bay. Willy Neurath was forced north from Neuengamme, about 50 miles. From Stutthof in the east, George Schwab, Manfred Goldberg, and his mother were sent to a nearby town aptly named Hell and put on barges.
We had to sit down, spread our legs wide apart so the next person could sit between our legs so that their back was touching our chest. That way they could get the maximum number of people into that confined area of the barge. 4 tugs appeared. The crews were SS people. Each one coupled themselves to one of the barges and they towed us out to sea. We had absolutely no idea what was planned, what was happening. People kept speculating that they would just sink us at sea to get rid of us.
What were the conditions?
Oh, terrible. Just beyond description. No toilet facilities, hardly any food. You could hardly sit. You could certainly not sleep.
Sounds like hell.
Hell. Hell on earth. Absolutely.
The barges, each packed with about 1,000 prisoners, were towed by tugboat for 6 days, about 400 miles across the Baltic, to where the Cap Arcona was positioned. The Cap Arcona arrived in Lübeck Bay on April 14, 1945, 2 weeks before Hitler killed himself and 3 weeks before the end of the war in Europe. It was anchored out there, about 2 miles offshore. With its engines barely running and little in the way of food and water, the former Queen of the Atlantic, a playground for the rich and famous, was about to become a floating concentration camp. With nowhere to hold the amassed prisoners, SS guards jammed more than 4,000, including Willy Neurath, onto the Cap Arcona.
And one must remember this is a ship that's meant for 1,500 people. It's not meant for 4,000 to 5,000 prisoners.
So they were jammed.
They were jammed
there.
like sardines.
Do we know what the Nazis intended to do with the prisoners on the ship?
I think they intended them to die.
Prisoners already were dying on the barges fleeing Stutthof, carrying Schwab and the Goldbergs. You had been without food and water?
Very little. Next to nothing. Very little.
Once in the bay, the SS guards uncoupled the tugboats, leaving the prisoners adrift.
And we were left on the high seas in the barges alone.
They just abandoned you?
Abandoned. We were left alone, supposedly on minefields.
Schwab and Goldberg told us mixed in with the concentration camp victims were a few prisoners of war. They had been better fed and better treated, and they seized the opportunity.
They managed to prise loose some very long floorboards and began using these planks of wood as oars, and they rowed in that manner into the night. Shortly before dawn, the barge ran aground, and anyone who still had an ounce of strength began clambering onto the top deck. It meant jumping into the water and wading through the water to shore. But there were a proportion of people on board. They were still alive, they were still breathing, but their mind had ceased functioning. They just sat there listlessly, awaiting their fate.
Norwegian prisoners on George Schwab's barge took advantage of the wind blowing toward shore.
They came and collected the blankets that we had and made sails. And we managed to sail towards land.
What was your condition?
Terribly weak, terribly weak. You know, I was a walking skeleton.
Like many on board, he was almost too weak to move. But a fellow prisoner, an acquaintance from his hometown named Eula, saw him and demanded he get up.
Eula sort of dragged me. I begged him, leave me alone. I have no strength left. No.
With Eula's help, Schwab managed to climb out of the barge. The Goldbergs got out of theirs too, only to be intercepted by the SS and German troops on the beach.
They, of course, were livid that we had moved the barge and had jumped off. So, in revenge, one part of them clambered onto the barge, and we would hear a lot of shooting. Every one of these unfortunate people who no longer knew what to do to save themselves were shot because they were just sitting there listlessly, and we felt practically certain that we would be shot next. But instead, they lined us up into a column.
We were told that we were going to be shipped to a liner by the name of Cap Arcona.
And while we stood there, we saw quite a large number of bombers, aeroplanes, moving overhead.
The Cap Arcona was in the bombers' sights. The war was nearly over, but the prisoners' ordeal was not. That part of our story when we come back. At the beginning of May 1945, the war in Europe was all but over. Adolf Hitler was dead. German forces were in retreat, and the Third Reich was crumbling. One of the last Nazi defensive positions was at Lübeck Bay in the Baltic Sea, where German ships fled seeking safe harbor, including the Cap Arcona, a luxury ocean liner commandeered by the Nazis for the war effort. As the Allies closed in, the SS evacuated concentration camps and packed thousands of prisoners onto the Cap Arcona. Around noon on May 3, 1945, 13-year-old George Schwab was ordered to line up to board the ship.
But the Cap Arcona could not come close to shore because it was a large liner.
Big ship.
So we were going to be transported to the Cap Arcona by another ship. I was in the back of the line. I was in no hurry.
You purposely got to the back of the line?
Back of the line.
He was at a dock near this German naval base where Manfred Goldberg and his mother were lined up too.
And it is while we stood there that we witnessed bombers and fighter planes coming along.
Could you see any markings on the plane?
No, we had no idea what nationality they were.
You could see the planes coming in.
Oh, we could see the planes clearly.
You
we
could
see the bombs dropping.
Can you remember what it sounded like?
There were some pretty powerful explosions, and there were quite a few.
The Cap Arcona was hit. With more than 4,000 prisoners on board, the floating concentration camp became a fiery tomb. In a hard-to-believe turn of events, the attackers were British Typhoon fighters like these, part of the Allied forces moving in to finish off the Nazis. The British came to liberate these prisoners.
They did, yeah.
And ended up killing thousands of them. It's like horror on top of horror.
It is, and yet some of them did survive to remember it.
Bill Niven is a British historian and scholar of the Holocaust. He told us the mistaken attack on the Cap Arcona and a smaller ship is one of the most wrenching tragedies of the war.
The prisoners knew that the war was nearing its end. I think a lot of them probably had hopes that they would survive, and that gave them the strength and the courage to hang on.
At the Cap Arcona Museum in the town of Neustadt by Lübeck Bay, he described the attack. British typhoons struck in waves. The Cap Arcona was hit around 3 p.m. Do you have any idea how many bombs were dropped on the ship?
Some people say 60 or over 60. You can imagine the panic and the horror that broke out when the bombs hit the ship, especially for those concentration camp prisoners who were in the very lower decks of the ship, and they were unable to get up to the top because of the flames.
Was this the worst case of friendly fire in the Royal Air Force's history?
Quite probably, yeah.
Sebastian Cox recently retired as chief historian for Britain's Royal Air Force, the RAF. He blames the incident on the fog of war. Why was the Cap Arcona targeted?
Because the Allies believed that there was going to be an attempt to flee by certain Nazi elements across the Baltic to Norway and essentially continue the war.
Did the British military have any idea that concentration camp survivors were on the Cap Arcona?
If you mean, did the pilots have any idea? Absolutely not.
But other members of the British military did know.
What we learn from the records, that the British were handed two opportunities very close to the 3rd of May in regards to the placement of prisoners on board the ship.
Concentration camp prisoners on those ships.
Indeed.
Daniel Long wrote his PhD history thesis on the attack on the Cap Arcona. We met him at the British National Archives in London, where he showed us these fragile war documents.
This is the only official investigation that was carried out into the tragic sinking of the Cap Arcona.
Shortly after the bombing, a British war crimes investigator interviewed the intelligence officer for the squadrons that attacked the Cap Arcona and other ships in the bay.
The intelligence officer admitted on 2 occasions that a message was received on the 2nd of May, 1945, that the ships had been loaded with concentration camp prisoners.
That intelligence came in the day before the attack.
Which then leads to suggest that there was ample time to warn the pilots on the planes.
That information did not make it to the RAF pilots?
That's correct.
The report does not say why the intelligence officer failed to inform the pilots, but it did blame RAF personnel for the error and called for further inquiry. The report strongly urged that there be a follow-up investigation. That has never happened, has it?
Not to my knowledge.
Why not?
Attempting to, conduct a detailed investigation would, in many respects, be a little pointless. What are you going to conclude?
To find out what went wrong, what mistakes were made.
We know what happened. The RAF made a mistake. An individual made a very tragic mistake, and we know the consequences.
About 7,000 prisoners perished when the ships were bombed in the bay. Of the more than 4,000 on the Cap Arcona, only about 400 survived. Bill Niven told us several survivors later wrote accounts of the hell they endured at sea.
Im Raum waren Tausende von Gefangenen wie Heringe zusammen. Thousands of prisoners were packed together like herrings. Sie streckten die Arme hoch und schrien, ich will raus, ich will raus. So they stretched their arms up and they cried out, I want out, I want out. This is really quite terrible to have to read this. The fire suddenly got more and more intensive, and this was because the flesh of the prisoners was burning so strongly, it made this intensity happen. It's distressing to read.
Bruno Neurath Wilson's father, Willie, a political prisoner, was trapped on the ship when the bombs hit.
My father managed to go to the back of the ship where it was not burning, and there he survived because he couldn't swim.
He survived because he couldn't swim.
He did not jump into the water. And prisoners who jumped into the water were shot by the SS.
When the British realized their mistake, they dispatched rescuers who plucked Willie Neurath and others from the listing deck of the Cap Arcona and took them to shore.
This is the stretch of beach where your father came ashore?
In this front of the beach, yes.
Bruno told us in an improbable twist of fate, his mother Ava, a naval staff assistant, had been transferred to the naval base at Lubeck Bay. When she saw the bombing, she was drawn to the beach.
She had only one hope, to know where is my husband, is he still living, and maybe my husband is on the ship.
How did they find each other?
She came from this direction and she saw a man coming towards her. She didn't recognize the one person she wanted to see.
He must have been thin and weak.
And dirty from the burning, but he came over to her and called his nickname he had for her, Muppel.
What does Muppel mean?
Muppel means something like, I love your round face. She recognized his voice by this one word, Muppel.
That ship was a graveyard for so many people, but yet it brought your parents back together.
Yeah, I don't know if there are hidden meanings in life, but one meaning can be that I am alive now and can tell about this story.
As for George Schwab, he pulled inspiration from the horror.
This is a prize for having helped Latvia get into NATO.
The native of Latvia moved to New York, earned a PhD in political science, and had an illustrious career as an academic and peace broker.
Here I'm with King Hussein,
Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton. You know,
Dr. Schwab, I think you knew everyone.
Somewhat.
Manfred Goldberg and his mother settled in London. She passed away in 1961. Goldberg married, started a business and a family. In 2017, he returned to the Stutthof concentration camp with the then Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. He has made it his life mission to share his story.
I consider that part of my revenge on the Nazis. They wanted to exterminate us, and here we are, not only having survived, we are now great-grandparents.
That's your revenge.
My revenge on the Nazis, yes.
The Cap Arcona lay half-sunken in Lubeck Bay for 4 years before being dismantled. But the story has lain beneath the surface, little known beyond this Baltic coast. It's now tradition on the 3rd of May for families of victims and survivors to sail to the site where the ship was bombed. They want the world to remember. This past May, Manfred Goldberg returned to Lübeck Bay to commemorate the 80th anniversary of his liberation at the end of the war in Europe. He stood on the site where he witnessed the attack on the Cap Arcona and went to a Jewish cemetery to chant a memorial prayer.
The names Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen and Buchenwald are infamous as the scene of atrocities, concentration camps run by Adolf Hitler's notorious SS. But what you may be surprised to learn, as we were, is that 2 Nazi concentration camps were established on British soil in the Channel Islands, around 80 miles from the British mainland. The islands lie just off the coast of France, became possessions of the English crown around 1,000 years ago, and were occupied by Germany for nearly 5 years during World War II. We visited what remains of the camps this past winter, just before the British government completed a review of the death toll there, with findings that are hotly disputed.
It's pretty well hidden, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's all overgrown.
If you didn't know how to get here, you wouldn't easily stumble across it. And this was a sort of back entrance.
There's not much left of the Third Reich's Lager Sylt concentration camp. On the windswept island of Alderney, about 3 miles long and 1.5 wide, nature is gradually swallowing up its crumbling concrete walls.
And the camp's up here.
These take you straight into the camp.
Marcus Roberts is an Oxford-educated amateur historian who runs heritage tours. He spent years researching this forgotten chapter in British history.
So undoubtedly, if you wanted to put a pin on the map, you could say this is where the Holocaust happened on British sovereign territory.
When Germany invaded France in 1940, the British government calculated that the Channel Islands had no strategic value and gave them up without a fight. Nearly all of the residents of Alderney decided to evacuate before the German troops arrived. On the empty island, the Germans set up 2 concentration camps as well as labour camps. They brought in prisoners of war and forced labourers to build giant fortifications that still survive today, part of Hitler's Atlantic Wall to protect against Allied attack. A minority of them were Jewish. Others were from Russia, Ukraine, Poland and Spain.
I understand this was called the Tunnel of Death.
Yes, it was notorious in the memory of prisoners. On 2 occasions they were forced to cram in here in an apparent rehearsal for their own death.
After the war, in 1945, the British military investigated the camps and put the death toll on Alderney in the low hundreds. Some of those who lost their lives were buried under this plot of land. But Marcus Roberts and others argue that more than 10,000 must have died on the island based on controversial calculations about the size of the labour force needed to build the fortifications. Roberts told us it's because he's Jewish that he's determined to count all of the dead.
There's the Jewish instinct to, leave no one behind.
You're trying to make sure that all the Jewish dead are counted.
Remembered. If you don't remember a life, it's as if they never lived at all.
Most academics dispute Roberts's estimate of the death toll. But partly as a result of those disagreements, last year the British government appointed a team of researchers to comb through archives across Europe and more accurately count the number of prisoners who died on Alderney. Dr. Gilly Carr, an archaeologist at Cambridge University, is coordinating the review.
Why is this just a document search, not a dig?
It is likely that some of the people in mass graves were Jewish, and according to halakha or Jewish law, you cannot disturb the dead. But the second reason is that according to prisoner statements, Some people were dumped at sea or thrown off cliffs. What are we going to do? Dig up the entire island? Well, we can't do that.
The researchers are drawing on rich material. The Nazis were meticulous record keepers, and British archives contain first-hand testimonies from survivors.
Look at this. We were beaten with everything they could lay their hands on, with sticks, spades, pickaxes.
It sounds absolutely ghastly.
On certain days, 5 to 6, up to 10 men died.
Dr. Carr told us there's no evidence that gas chambers were used on Alderney, but there were summary executions, and the prisoners built the Nazi fortifications on starvation rations.
Were they taken to Alderney to be worked to death?
They were certainly seen as expendable. The aim was to get every ounce of work out of them, and if they died, it didn't matter, and that was kind of perhaps expected.
They were disposable human beings?
Yes, yes.
How did your father end up in Alderney?
At a pub in the Channel Islands, we met Gary Font. His father, Francisco Font, fought on the losing side in the Spanish Civil War, was arrested in France, handed over to the Germans, and sent to a concentration camp on Alderney. Francisco survived and later married a British woman, Gary's mother.
He witnessed the execution of a young Soviet boy who decided to leave the working detail and to change his footwear. So he decided to pick up these paper bags and wrap them round his feet and then tie them with string. And a SS guard had seen him do this and walked up to him and shot him point blank range.
Gary told us his father's experiences left him scarred.
I saw the emotion on his face. Yeah, it's a tough one.
Do you think that emotion came from that he had survived the war in Spain and survived the camp here?
Yeah, exactly. It was the first time I realised, wow, this man has a deep-rooted emotion inside him that he could never get out.
The British government's effort to get the truth out by recounting the dead was commissioned by Lord Pickles.
Sir Eric Pickles!
A former cabinet minister and now the UK's envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
The figures vary, not by a few hundred, not by a few thousand, but by tens of thousands.
So it was the controversy that prompted you to commission the review?
Yes. It seemed to me that the sensible thing was, well, OK, let's do this in the open, let's do it fully transparent.
He's also asked the researchers to put names to as many of those killed as they can.
If you remember them as individuals, then it's another blow against Hitler. Hitler wanted to eradicate the memory of people.
So this is kind of an ongoing fight against Hitler and his ideas.
Hitler's evil hand still continues to affect Europe and to affect the world.
But it's taken nearly 80 years for the British government to re-examine what happened on Alderney and to make its report public. The official British investigations in 1945 were classified for decades. And unlike the trials of Nazi officials in Nuremberg, the British authorities failed to prosecute a single German officer who worked on Alderney, even though many of them ended up in British prisoner of war camps.
I mean, just to be clear, these are possible war criminals. The British government has gathered evidence against them, and they are in British custody.
Yes, they are at this point, yes.
A sort of slam dunk case.
You'd have thought.
That's led Marcus Roberts and others to claim that the British government tried to cover up the extent of the atrocities on Alderney. Dr. Carr told us that could be true, but one key document from the British War Office investigation that may explain why there were no prosecutions is missing.
It could have been shredded decades ago as part of what do we need these files for anymore.
But could it also have been shredded for more nefarious purposes?
I have no idea. In order for me to say there was a cover-up, I want to see the decisions taken, I want to look through those steps and to make up my own mind.
Why might the British government have tried to
cover up or whitewash what happened on Alderney and maybe more broadly on the Channel Islands?
There are some things that happened that might not, that the British government might not necessarily have wanted a wider audience to know about.
Those things, once feared too troubling for the broader public, happened on 3 of the other Channel Islands, where most residents did not evacuate before the occupation. When the Germans arrived, the locals mostly cooperated, often with little choice. Hitler's portrait was hung outside this cinema on the island of Guernsey. Nazi propaganda showed the British police working for German troops. And British newspapers on the islands printed orders from Berlin.
This is a British newspaper, and it's got the swastika on top.
That's right.
At the official archives on the island of Jersey, Linda Romerell showed us how British officials implemented Nazi policies, asking Jewish residents to identify themselves and then confiscating their assets.
There was a huge amount of requisitioning of people's houses, people's property during the occupation period.
But some resisted, risking punishment to paint anti-Nazi graffiti and illegally listening to British news on the radio.
That's my great-aunt Louisa. I suspect that she was probably quite steely.
One member of the resistance was Louisa Gould, who hid an escaped Russian prisoner in her home for nearly 2 years.
And this is the house.
Yeah.
Jenny Lecote told us when her great-aunt Louisa was finally caught, she was sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp in Germany.
She was killed in a Nazi gas chamber.
She was gassed to death, yeah.
After the occupation, did the British government get in touch with your family to talk about what Louisa had done during the occupation and about her murder by the Nazis?
The British government, I think, were kind of ashamed. They were horrified that it had happened, and they didn't really want to get too involved in what had gone on there.
Not wanting to talk about the resistance or not wanting to talk about the occupation at all?
Well, it was such a mixed picture. There were people who had resisted the Germans as much as resistance was possible within a tiny 9 by 5 mile island. And there were also people who'd collaborated. Some people had betrayed their own country. The only possible legislation was treason, which was still a hanging offence. They didn't want to get into that. That was the confusing, messy, dirty mixed picture of the Channel Islands occupation.
More of that messy, dirty history was revealed when the British government published its review in May. According to the new count, over 1,000 may have died in the camps. Predictably, it hasn't satisfied everyone.
Some kind of a apology and, moral recompense would be helpful.
You want the British government to apologise for not having prosecuted alleged war criminals?
Yes, I think it would be appropriate for them to recognise what should have been done didn't happen.
The horrors carried out on this tiny, remote island are difficult to imagine. The victims were silenced and buried. But now, nearly 8 decades later, they're finally being counted.
By the time a new play opened last spring off-Broadway by acclaimed writer and director Moises Kaufman, it had already been nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. It's based on the true story of a photo album from Auschwitz that was sent to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. in 2007. Museum historians weren't sure what to make of it at first, but the album turned out to be the scrapbook of a Nazi, an SS officer who helped run the day-to-day operations of Auschwitz, where about 1.1 million people, mostly Jews, were murdered between 1940 and 1945. As we first reported last May, the album doesn't show any prisoners or gas chambers. What it does show are some of the most notorious killers in history seemingly enjoying themselves. That's what museum officials found so chilling, and what Moises Kaufman spent 14 years creating a play about.
When I first saw the photographs, I got goosebumps. And I remember thinking, many of the people in my family died in Auschwitz. And these are the people who were doing it. And they don't seem to have any remorse. seeing that in a photograph so clearly articulated is terrifying. This is terrifying because they all look so much like us.
The photographs may appear unremarkable at first. SS officers at dinner parties, drinking, socializing, flirting with their young Nazi secretaries. But when these pictures were taken, the Germans were losing the war and exterminating more Jews in Auschwitz than at any other time in the Holocaust. Several images show an SS officer giving his secretaries blueberries, while a man plays an accordion. The inscription reads, "Here there are blueberries." Moises Kaufman picked that for the title of his play.
I wanted the audience to have the experience that we had looking at the photographs.
What was it about the series of the women eating blueberries that so struck you?
That they were just, teenage girls who were secretaries. Everyone is showing the photographer their empty plates. But there's one of the women who's pretend crying. So she's so sad because she's run out of blueberries. And outside of the frame, there's 1.1 million people who are being killed. So how do you lead your daily life and at the same time participate in one of the largest killing machines in the history of mankind?
The caption says, "Rain from a clear sky."
Kaufman's play is centered on the museum historians who worked with survivors and even descendants of Nazis themselves to uncover what the album was.
The images appear to be straight out of a holiday scrapbook.
No one had ever seen images like these before. There are few photos of Auschwitz because the Nazis worked hard to conceal their crimes.
I count 116 photographs.
Kaufman's main character is Rebecca Erbelding, the historian at the Holocaust Museum, played by actor Elizabeth Stallman.
This is when the album becomes an obsession for me.
The real Rebecca Erbelding received the album from a former U.S. counterintelligence officer. He said he found it in 1946 in an abandoned apartment in war-torn Frankfurt while hunting down Nazi war criminals. He donated it to the museum, but wanted to remain anonymous. How did you go about finding out who made this?
I didn't see any trains. I didn't see anything I recognized. It was maybe the third time flipping through it, and that's when I saw Joseph Mengele.
No pictures of Dr. Joseph Mengele in Auschwitz had ever been found before. To see the album, we went to a high-security, climate-controlled facility in Maryland, where the original pages are stored. That's Dr. Mengele.
That's Mengele, and these are still the only known photos of Mengele while he was stationed at the camp.
Mengele was known by prisoners at Auschwitz as the Angel of Death. He conducted gruesome medical experiments, mostly on children, and often stood on the platform when trains arrived, selecting who would be sent to work and who would die immediately in gas chambers.
Not only is it Mengele, these are some of the most infamous officers at the camp. So you see there's Bayer.
Richard Bayer is on the album's first page. He was the last commandant of Auschwitz. That helped historians identify his deputy, Karl Hocker, and it turned out this was Hocker's personal album, his cherished memories behind the scenes of a massacre. May 1944 is when Hocker got to Auschwitz.
Yes, so this is the entirety of his time at Auschwitz.
Before the war, Hocker had been a struggling bank teller. Becoming an SS officer at Auschwitz was considered a big step up.
He had been staffed at the Majdanek camp before this, and so he had experience with prisoners arriving, with selections, with gas chambers. He signed receipts for Zyklon B, the lethal gas that was used for killing people. He is a crucial cog in the Nazi killing machine.
The 116 photos in the album show Auschwitz as Karl Hocker wanted to remember it.
It's a mix of candid things and really officials. This is his dog. His dog's name is Favorit.
I mean, what's so stunning about them is how...
Normal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, who hasn't taken a photo of them shaking their dog's hand?
Mm-hmm. So this is Yule Fire 1944, which is Nazi Christmas. They know that the Soviets are coming. They are not far. They can probably hear the bombs.
They're lighting Christmas trees.
Yeah.
The album reveals something else museum officials hadn't seen before. The Nazis built a vacation resort at Auschwitz. It was called Sula Hütte. These pictures show a gathering of top SS officers there in July 1944. Rebecca Erbelding believes it was a party. They were congratulating themselves for successfully murdering more than 350,000 Hungarian Jews in just 55 days.
This looks like they're singing.
They are. And this front row is really what the director of the museum, Sarah Bloomfield, calls the chorus of criminals. So you have Hucker, you have Otto Mahl, the head of the gas chambers section. There's Rudolf Höss,
The former commandant of Auschwitz.
the former commandant of Auschwitz. Mengele is here.
They're celebrating the
successful mass
slaughter.
murder. Yeah.
It was somebody labeled it a metropolis of death. And that's what it was. It worked like an assembly line factory.
Irene Weiss got to Auschwitz the day after Karl Hawker started working there. She arrived when she was 13 on a train packed with Jews from Hungary. Separated from her parents and 4 of her siblings, she says she found herself on the platform holding her younger sister Edith's hand as they approached Dr. Mengele.
And everything was in a matter of seconds, that stick came down between us. He held life and death with that stick. All of a sudden, I was alone.
She didn't know it at the time, but that moment was captured by a Nazi photographer documenting the arrival and processing of Hungarian Jews. It appears in one of the only other albums of Auschwitz. This photo has been colorized.
This is the group already going to the gas chamber.
Where are you in this picture?
Well, I am right here.
This is you?
That's me right here.
So this is the moment after you've been separated from your little sister, Edith?
The very moment, yes. That's what I'm looking at. I can't leave. I left her.
Irene Weiss never saw Edith, her parents, or her brothers alive again. What she has is this photo. That's her mother, Leah, sitting on the ground just behind her brothers Gershon and Reuben at Auschwitz. After this picture was taken, they were led into a gas chamber.
They had to kill the children so there will not be a new generation. And they discovered that if they also killed the mothers, then they didn't have to worry about the chaos that would create separating.
The children wouldn't be upset by being separated.
And the mothers wouldn't be upset.
Weiss spent the next 8 months working outside one of those gas chambers. She sorted shoes and other belongings of the dead.
We saw these columns of women, mothers and children, and going into the door there, talking to us. And they're told they're walking into a bathhouse, They're asking questions, where are you from? And a half hour later, the chimney's belching fire. And that went on day after day and night after night.
So you saw thousands of women, children walking into gas chambers?
Absolutely.
And you talked to some of them?
Absolutely.
In the last seconds of their life, minutes of their life?
Yes, but we couldn't cry. It was an amazing thing. This is beyond crying. Tears are for normal pain. That kind of brutality from fellow mankind is so deep that, people say broken heart. The heart keeps working, but the soul never forgets.
Irene Weiss wasn't surprised by the photos in Karl Hawker's album, but when they were released publicly, they made headlines around the world. Tilman Taub read about them online in Germany while on his lunch break.
And there was an article, new photos from Auschwitz have appeared. I thought, this is interesting.
When he looked at the photos, he was surprised to see his grandfather, Dr. Heinz Baumkarter.
On the first picture, it wasn't 100% clear, but then I flipped 2 more pictures, and it was absolutely 100% clear that that was him.
Taub knew his grandfather was head physician at Sachsenhausen concentration camp and had done medical experiments on prisoners and sent thousands to be killed at other camps. But Taub wasn't sure why his grandfather had gone to Auschwitz.
In Germany,
He connected with Rebecca Erbelding and soon discovered just how deeply involved his grandfather was in the Holocaust.
When you see the picture of your grandfather, does that feel like your grandfather?
For me, strictly speaking, it's two different persons. The grandfather that I knew was a rather normal grandfather, and the SS officer is a different person for me.
It's impossible to reconcile the two.
It is difficult, really.
Taub now helps the museum search for more photos and documents by reaching out to other descendants of Nazis.
Of course, you want to be part of some kind of movement that helps preventing things like that from happening again.
You know your grandfather and you know what he did. Does it make you think differently about human beings, what we are all capable of?
Absolutely, absolutely.
How could highly educated physicians, people whose entire professional purpose was to heal, become systematic killers?
The play about the Hawker album by Moises Kaufman and Amanda Gronick, his co-writer and longtime collaborator, raises difficult questions, not just about our past, but about ourselves.
When we look at these pictures, we're looking through the lens of how they saw what they were doing.
Why is it important to see Auschwitz through their eyes?
Because they didn't wake up each morning thinking, I'm an evil monster, I'm going to do evil, monstrous things. They woke up each day and they went about their lives filled with justifications and beliefs in what they were doing.
It makes all of us ask the question, well, what am I capable of doing?
I think that's what's happening. When the audience comes in, they sit here and they go, who would I have been in that picture?
The most dangerous animal in the world is man, because other animals will hurt you if they're hungry or it's their nature of hunting. But man can turn into an animal in no time. All he needs is permission. As soon as permission is given from higher ups, from government, it accelerates. Even a hint of permission that it's okay to attack this group or exclude this group or shame that group. It's happening. It's never stopped.
Irene Weiss, now 94, has continued to share her story as a volunteer at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Here, There Are Blueberries has been performed in cities across the U.S., and the play will open in London in January.